The streets were bustling that afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the buildings in warm shades of orange and gold. People moved quickly, carrying bags, talking loudly, or simply walking with their own thoughts. Among them, a man moved calmly, almost unnoticed. He wore a plain jacket, faded jeans, and worn shoes. His hair was neatly combed, but nothing about him drew attention. Yet he carried himself with a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from someone who has seen and experienced much in life. He walked slowly, observing the crowd. Children ran past, laughing and chasing one another, their small feet tapping against the pavement. A street vendor shouted cheerfully, offering fresh fruit and pastries, waving his hand to attract customers. Couples strolled hand in hand, sharing small smiles and quiet conversations. The man watched everything, taking it in, not as a passerby, but as someone who wanted to understand the life around him. He wanted to see people as they truly were, without the masks they often wore for strangers. Today he had a plan, a simple one, at least on the surface. He carried with him a small bag and a folded sheet of music. Inside the bag was the most important thing he owned at this moment, a portable piano, carefully packed so that it could be set up in any public space. The piano was modest, not luxurious, but it could produce music capable of moving hearts. And that was exactly what he hoped it would do. He reached a quiet square at the heart of the city, where the crowd often gathered during evenings. The square was wide and open, with benches, a few trees, and a small fountain that sprayed water gently into the air. It was the perfect spot, he thought, to sit and play. People often walked through, some stopping to rest, others moving quickly on their way home. He would blend in, just another man looking for a place to enjoy the afternoon sun. Yet he knew something about this moment would be different. With careful hands, he unpacked the piano, placing it firmly on the ground. He unfolded the stand and adjusted the small bench. Everything was in place. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of anticipation settle on his shoulders. Then, just as he was about to lift the lid, a few children ran past, almost bumping into him. He smiled politely, nodding to them as they giggled and ran away. The world carried on, unaware of the moment about to unfold. Soon, curious onlookers began to gather. A man with a briefcase slowed his steps, a woman with a stroller paused, and a teenager on a skateboard came to a halt nearby. Some leaned against the fountain, others perched on benches, all watching as the man opened the piano fully. He looked around once more, scanning the crowd. They had no idea who he was. To them, he was just another person, perhaps a street performer, or a man trying to make an afternoon more interesting. Some smiled politely, while others exchanged amused glances. The air carried a mixture of curiosity and mild judgment, as people often feel when encountering something unfamiliar. Then he began to play. The first notes were quiet, almost hesitant, as if testing the waters. He let them linger, allowing the sound to fill the space between the benches and the fountain. The music was gentle, soft, almost shy at first. Some people paused, raising an eyebrow, unsure whether to stay or move on. A few muttered comments under their breath, and a small group of teenagers laughed, whispering to each other as if mocking the man. They didn't know what he could do. They didn't know that the music they heard was only the first ripple of something far greater as he continued. The notes grew stronger, more confident. The melody unfolded slowly, carefully, like a story being told without words. People stopped in their tracks. The man with the briefcase lowered his eyes from his phone. The woman with the stroller held the baby closer, and even the teenagers slowed their laughter, sensing the change in the air. The music was no longer just sound. It was a presence, something that made the square feel different, warmer, and more alive. But not everyone appreciated it. A few onlookers whispered, "Who does he think he is? And this is just street noise." Some chuckled and shook their heads, mocking the effort. The billionaire felt the sting, though he did not show it. He had expected this. People often fear or dismiss what they do not understand. But instead of anger, he felt patience. He played on, allowing his fingers to dance across the keys, each note deliberate, each chord meant to touch someone's heart. He did not need their approval, but he hoped to reach them nonetheless. Gradually, the mood began to shift. The music softened the edges of skepticism, reaching into the hearts of those who had stopped to listen. A little girl stepped closer, her eyes wide, staring at the keys as they moved under his fingers. She reached out, almost wanting to touch them, mesmerized by the sound. A young couple, holding hands, found themselves swaying slightly to the rhythm, caught in the beauty of the melody. Even the teenagers, who had been mocking him earlier, now exchanged uncertain glances. As if recognizing something they hadn't expected to see, the man noticed these subtle changes. He did not smile too broadly. He remained focused, letting the music do the work. Each note carried emotion, hope, sorrow, longing, and a quiet strength. It was as if he were telling a story of a life filled with challenges, triumphs, and moments of reflection without uttering a single word. The crowd began to feel it, almost instinctively. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned in, drawn to the sound that seemed too beautiful, too sincere to be random. Time passed, though it felt suspended. 10 minutes could have been an hour. The man played as if in a private world, yet the entire square had become part of it. Passersby stopped to watch, and even those who had planned to ignore him found themselves captivated. The fountain's gentle spray glistened in the sunlight, reflecting tiny rainbows, and the square seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the music. For a moment, judgment, mockery, and doubt vanished. All that remained was the human connection forged through sound, through shared attention, and through the simple act of listening. A sudden cough reminded him that some were still skeptical. A man in a business suit muttered, "Why is he showing off?" But even this did not break the spell. The melody shifted again, softer now, more intimate, like a secret shared between strangers. People leaned closer, unconsciously forming a circle, creating a sense of community that had not existed moments before. The man's fingers moved with precision, but also with a tenderness that could only come from someone who truly loved music. Every note carried his soul, and the crowd, whether they realized it or not, was part of that expression. By now, the initial laughter and mockery had faded into whispers of admiration. Some people exchanged glances, nodding slowly, understanding that what they were witnessing was rare. A few brave souls dared to clap quietly, almost afraid to interrupt the flow of sound. The man acknowledged them with a subtle nod, but continued playing. He knew the moment was not about recognition, not about applause or praise. It was about truth. The truth of music, the truth of human emotion, and the truth that sometimes appearances could be deceiving. The sunlight began to tilt, casting longer shadows across the square. People felt the day shifting, but they did not move immediately. The music held them, like a gentle tether to something larger than themselves. Children sat down on the edge of the fountain, mesmerized. Couples held hands a little tighter. Even those who had doubted or mocked the man now felt a quiet admiration, a sense of having witnessed something extraordinary. He had come to the square as a stranger, an ordinary man in plain clothes. But the music had revealed something remarkable. And then, the man allowed the final notes to linger, hanging in the air like a question unanswered. He did not rush to close the piano. He let the sound fade naturally. The square became quiet again, but the silence was different now. It was a silence filled with reflection, with awe, and with a subtle understanding that they had seen more than just a man playing a piano. They had glimpsed the power of patience, skill, and humility. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, not used to such quiet reverence. Others wiped their eyes discreetly, feeling emotions they had not expected to feel in the middle of a busy afternoon. The man packed his piano slowly, careful not to disturb the magic he had created. People watched, some curious, some reluctant to leave, as if afraid the moment might vanish if they turned away. He smiled faintly to himself, knowing that today he had witnessed genuine reactions. Not admiration for wealth, not for status, but for something far more real. As he walked away from the square, leaving the crowd behind, he blended into the flow of ordinary people once more. Some would remember him, some would not. But the man had learned what he had come to discover, the truth of human connection. The way people could be touched when they least expected it, and the simple, profound power of sharing something honest and beautiful with the world. The man returned home that evening. But sleep did not come easily. His mind replayed the moments in the square, the way people had first mocked him and then slowly been drawn in by the music. Even though he had performed many times in private, this was different. He had wanted to see genuine reactions, not filtered through fame or wealth. And now he understood how fragile and honest those reactions could be. There was a rawness in watching people confront something they did not expect, a mixture of surprise, admiration, and a touch. Off shame for their first impressions, the next day he awoke early. The sun had barely risen, painting the city in soft gold and pink. He prepared himself carefully, choosing another simple outfit, one that would make him blend in rather than stand out. His intention was clear: to return to the square, to continue playing, but this time to test how far human emotion could be reached when patience and sincerity guided every note. He packed the piano with care, checking every hinge and key, making sure it would be ready for another public performance. As he walked through the city, he noticed small details he had not before. The street cleaners sweeping the pavement, the baker opening his shop, the elderly man feeding birds in the park. Each person moved with purpose, yet each carried their own stories, hidden from view. He imagined what each life might contain: triumphs, heartbreaks, dreams, and he thought about how little people often knew of one another. This thought settled in him like a quiet truth. Everyone carries music inside them, even if it cannot always be heard. And perhaps today, through his piano, a small part of that music could be awakened. When he arrived at the square, a small crowd had already gathered. Some remembered him from yesterday, though they did not know his name or background. Children pointed and whispered excitedly to their parents, while the teenagers who had mocked him yesterday now exchanged curious looks. A few adults leaned against the fountain or sat on benches, unsure whether to stay. The man smiled faintly to himself, sensing that anticipation hung in the air. He unpacked the piano with deliberate care, the movement calm and precise, almost ceremonial. Every action was intentional. Designed to set the stage for more than just music. Hit was a test of patience, humility, and emotion. He took a moment before starting, surveying the crowd. They were an ordinary mix of people: workers in uniforms, students with backpacks, a woman walking her dog, and a man reading a newspaper. None of them knew the full story of the man before them. He was not a celebrity, not someone seeking attention, just another human being with something to share. He began to play slowly, deliberately. The first notes were soft, almost fragile, as if testing the air itself. But within them was precision, control, and the unmistakable mark of a master. At first, the crowd reacted cautiously. A few children ran closer, drawn by curiosity, while some adults remained skeptical, muttering under their breath, "He plays well, but why here?" one woman asked. The teenagers from yesterday snickered quietly, still holding on to their doubt. The man ignored them, letting the music flow. He did not need approval. He only needed honesty, and it began to emerge. Some people stopped moving, some tilted their heads, and gradually, the attention of the crowd focused entirely on the piano. The music grew bolder, more confident, filling the square with harmonies that carried both strength and tenderness. People felt it in their bones, in the quiet spaces between the notes. A mother held her child closer, feeling the melody wrap around them like a gentle blanket. A worker leaning on the fountain paused, gripping his briefcase tightly, as if the music had opened a memory he had long buried. Even the teenagers who had doubted him could not resist watching, their laughter fading into silent curiosity. Something about the way the man played demanded attention, even from those who did not wish to give it. He shifted into a new melody, slower this time, more emotional. The keys spoke of long journeys, of challenges faced and overcome, of moments of quiet reflection. People closed their eyes, allowing themselves to be drawn into the music. A man in the corner, who had been frowning moments before, now held his forehead in his hand as if trying to process the sudden wave of feeling. A teenager brushed away a small tear without looking around, ashamed but unable to stop the emotion rising. Even the passerby with the newspaper lowered it slowly, sensing that something profound was unfolding before them. The music carried a sense of storytelling, even without words. It spoke of love lost and found, of hardship and triumph, of the quiet moments that define a life more than grand achievements ever could. The man's fingers moved with confidence, yet with a delicacy that allowed each note to linger, resonating with the heartbeats of the listeners. Each chord struck a balance between vulnerability and strength, showing the audience that even something ordinary, like a man in plain clothes playing a piano, could contain extraordinary depth. People felt themselves connecting, not just to the music, but to something deeper, something human. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. They were not used to experiencing such raw emotion in a public space. The woman walking her dog stopped mid-step, holding the leash loosely, captivated. An elderly man resting on a bench wiped his eyes discreetly, remembering memories that the music had unearthed. Even the skeptics could no longer hide their attention. The music was no longer entertainment, it was a mirror, reflecting feelings that had been dormant, emotions that had been pushed aside by the rush of everyday life. The man played on, aware but unbothered, letting the music guide both him and the crowd. After a while, a small group began to gather closer. Children sat cross-legged on the pavement, staring at the keys as they moved under the man's fingers. Adults leaned forward, eyes fixed, feeling the power of the melody in their chest. People who had ignored him at first were now leaning on benches or crouching down, caught in the spell. Even the teenagers from yesterday, who had been the loudest in their mockery, watched in silence, their expressions a mix of wonder and disbelief. They did not understand fully what was happening, only that they were being moved in a way they had not expected. The man noticed the subtle shift. It was as if the music had created a quiet bond between all of them. The square, once filled with casual motion and scattered attention, had become a shared space of reflection. Passersby, who had been walking quickly now, slowed, some stopping entirely, drawn into the collective experience. The fountain's gentle spray shimmered in the sunlight, casting reflections that danced alongside the music. The sound of keys and the murmur of the crowd blended together, creating a symphony of human presence and emotion. Then he changed the melody once more, this time slower, more intimate. Each note seemed to speak directly to individuals, bypassing judgment and skepticism. A young mother held her baby close, her eyes glistening with emotion. An older man in a suit rubbed his hand across his face, feeling tears threaten, though he tried to hide them. A student, leaning against the wall, whispered quietly, This is incredible." Even the casual passerby, someone who had not intended to stop, paused mid-step, sensing that the moment demanded attention. The music carried them all along, creating a subtle wave of shared humanity. The man's eyes scanned the crowd occasionally, but he did not seek recognition. He understood that true connection required no labels, no explanations. He only needed to play honestly, and the crowd would respond honestly. And they did. Each note, each chord, each deliberate pause invited the listeners to feel something real, something they might have forgotten in the noise of daily life. The skeptics softened, the curious leaned in, and the previously indifferent found themselves caught in the gentle current of emotion. Music, in its purest form, had bridged the gap between stranger and stranger, human and human. As the sun began to lower, casting longer shadows across the square, the man allowed the music to settle into a final lingering chord. The sound floated over the crowd, delicate and fragile, as if it could vanish at any moment. People remained still, caught in the quiet aftermath. Some dared to clap softly, hesitant not to break the spell. Others simply sat or stood, letting the silence sink in. For the first time in days, many felt a profound sense of presence, of attention, of being part of something larger than themselves. They had come for curiosity, perhaps even amusement, but what they experienced was far beyond expectation. The man packed his piano slowly, carefully aware of the reverence in the crowd. He did not speak. Words would have diminished the moment. The crowd watched as he folded the keys, lifted the piano, and carried it with quiet dignity. They were left with a sense of awe, a mixture of gratitude and a subtle, lingering awareness that they had witnessed something rare. They had seen someone who did not seek fame, someone who did not demand recognition, but who could move them deeply with honesty and talent alone. As he walked away, blending once more into the ordinary crowd, he noticed the glances of those who had been closest. Some nodded slowly, silently acknowledging what they had felt. Others whispered to one another, trying to put words to the emotions they could not name. Children waved briefly, and a few adults smiled in quiet appreciation. He did not look back. There was nothing to prove. The experience itself and the human response it evoked was enough. He had learned that genuine emotion cannot be faked, that people can be touched when they least expect it, and that true artistry requires patience, humility, and honesty. Even as the city resumed its rhythm, the cars, the conversations, the footsteps on pavement, the echo of the music lingered. People carried it with them, a reminder that beauty could be found in unexpected places. That connection could be forged through shared attention, and that appearances could deceive. The man's experiment, simple in intention but profound in effect, had succeeded. He had seen human hearts respond not to wealth, not to fame, but to sincerity, and he knew, as he disappeared into the city streets, that this was only the beginning of a journey that would touch many lives. One note at a time. The following morning, the man woke with a quiet determination. Yesterday had been powerful, but today he wanted to explore something deeper. He wanted to see how people's hearts could respond when they were invited, without words, into the world of genuine emotion. He prepared his piano carefully, checking the keys and adjusting the bench to be comfortable for long play. He dressed simply once again, blending with the city, plain jacket over a worn shirt, jeans and shoes that had seen many walks. He wanted nothing to distract from the music or the experience. The streets were waking slowly as he moved toward the square. Vendors were setting up stalls, their calls mingling with the clatter of carts and the chatter of early passers-by. Children ran after pigeons, their small feet drumming against the pavement, while the elderly greeted each other with slow, careful steps. The man walked steadily, feeling the rhythm of the city around him. He noticed details he might have overlooked before, the way the sun glinted off a shop window, the careful placement of flower pots outside a cafe, the subtle expressions on the faces of people walking to work. Every detail was part of the scene he would enter. Every life a thread in the tapestry of the square. When he arrived, a small crowd had already gathered. Some recognized him from the previous day, curious to see if he would play again. A few people whispered to one another, "It's him, the piano man." Others were new, passing through, drawn only by the quiet sound of his setup or the promise of music in the morning air. The man set his piano in place with careful precision, unfolding the bench and adjusting the lid. He did not rush. Each movement carried intention, a ritual in preparation for something larger than himself. He looked at the faces around him. Children stared curiously, some holding their parents' hands. Adults watched with a mixture of skepticism and hope. A few teenagers lingered at the edge of the crowd, still unsure if they should take him seriously. The man took a deep breath and pressed the first key. The note rang out clearly, soft yet deliberate, cutting through the early morning noise. The piano's voice filled the square, reaching every corner with gentle insistence. At first people paused, unsure how to react. Some muttered to themselves, "It's just a piano. Anyone can play a piano." Others tilted their heads, feeling something they could not yet name. The children leaned forward slightly, curiosity written plainly across their faces. Even the teenagers from before stopped their casual chatter, intrigued despite themselves. The man's hands moved across the keys with careful intent, each note chosen not for show, but for meaning. As the melody unfolded, it grew richer, more confident. The music was no longer tentative. It carried a story within each chord, a depth that seemed to reach into the hearts of listeners. People began to feel it without fully understanding why. A mother held her baby close, feeling a warmth rise within her chest. A man in a suit, walking by, paused, his briefcase in hand, and closed his eyes, letting the melody sink in. The teenagers shifted uncomfortably. feeling an unexpected pull towards something greater than amusement or skepticism. The man shifted to a slower, more contemplative melody. The notes spoke of quiet struggles, of moments when life felt heavy, and of the courage it took to continue. Each chord carried weight and tenderness, and the audience could not ignore it. An elderly woman seated on a bench wiped her eyes discreetly, memories of her own life surfacing unbidden. A young woman with a camera lowered it, caught by the sincerity of the music. The man played on, aware that his fingers were telling stories words could never fully convey. Some in the crowd began to cry quietly, though they did not know why. The music seemed to reach inside them, opening doors to emotions long closed. Children, sensing the gravity of the moment, sat down on the pavement, wide-eyed. Adults felt a tug at the heart they had not expected. Even the skeptics, the ones who had mocked or dismissed him before, found themselves leaning in, their expressions softening as the piano spoke in a language beyond words. The melody grew more complex, layers building, each note carrying intention and meaning. The man's hands moved with precision and emotion, creating a rhythm that seemed to mirror the beating hearts of the listeners. Some people felt a memory they had long forgotten, a joy or a sorrow that had lain dormant. Others felt a quiet hope, an understanding that life could be more than routine, more than appearances, more than judgment. The music was teaching them something profound, that true emotion cannot be faked, and that beauty can come from the most unexpected places. A small group of people moved closer, forming a semicircle around the piano. Children perched on the fountain edge, adults leaned on benches, and even the teenagers from before watched in silence, their earlier bravado replaced with curiosity and awe. The music carried a story of resilience, of enduring trials and finding light even in dark moments. People felt their own lives reflected in the chords, their own challenges, victories, and losses resonating in harmony with the piano. The man noticed the reactions but did not allow them to distract him. He remained focused on the music, on the story within each note. He knew that if he played honestly, people would feel the truth without needing explanations. And they did. Tears flowed quietly from some, while others held their hands to their hearts, feeling emotions they had not expected to confront in public. The piano had transformed the square into a space of shared humanity, a place where judgment faded and sincere emotion took its place. As the melody deepened, the music became almost a conversation. It spoke to each person individually, touching lives differently but powerfully. A worker who had been rushing to his job stopped, feeling a connection to something larger than himself. A young mother, previously tense and worried, felt a calmness descend over her. A teenager who had mocked the music yesterday whispered to a friend, I didn't expect this." The man's fingers continued to dance over the keys, weaving emotion and skill into a tapestry that seemed to hold the attention of every soul present. The sun climbed higher, casting light across the square, but no one noticed the time. They were caught in the moment, suspended between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Even the vendors paused, leaning against their stalls, listening to the music that seemed to wrap the city in a gentle embrace. The man played as if telling a story of life itself. Not a story of wealth or status, but of human experience, of struggles, joys, quiet victories, and unspoken truths. Gradually, the music shifted again, becoming softer, more intimate. The notes carried an almost fragile beauty, as if inviting the listeners to hold something precious within themselves. Children leaned forward, their eyes wide, captivated by the emotion in the melody. Adults felt their breath catch, a lump in their throat, memories or feelings surfacing unexpectedly. Even the most skeptical among them found themselves drawn in, unable to resist the sincerity in each note. The piano had become a bridge, connecting people in ways that words could never manage. By now, the crowd was fully engaged. The square was quiet except for the sound of the piano and the subtle whispers of emotion. Some people held hands, others closed their eyes, and a few reached out toward the piano, as if wanting to touch the music itself. The man played on, not needing applause, not needing recognition. The connection, the shared experience, was enough. He knew that the music had reached hearts. had spoken to something deeper than daily life or surface judgments. Then, without warning, the music soared, lifting the melody to a higher intensity, powerful yet controlled. The piano sang with a clarity and depth that made every listener feel something unique. Some cried openly now, unable to hold back. A mother clutched her child tightly, tears running down her cheeks. An elderly man leaned forward, gripping the bench, feeling a wave of emotion he could not explain. Even the teenagers, who had been dismissive or mocking, now sat in silence. Morning sun rose slowly, spilling warm light across the quiet streets. The city seemed ordinary, almost sleepy, yet it carried a quiet sense of anticipation. Word of the man and his piano had spread far and wide, not through newspapers, not through headlines, but through the voices of those who had witnessed him play. The videos online had been shared, reposted, and talked about, but the true magic had been felt, not seen. People remembered the feeling of his music more than the notes themselves. The way it stirred emotions they hadn't allowed themselves to feel for years. He walked through the streets once more, piano carefully packed on his back. His steps were measured, calm, and unhurried. He noticed things he had always noticed before: the baker opening his shop, the aroma of fresh bread drifting through the air, children running along the sidewalk, parents calling them back gently. He paused for a moment to watch a small dog chase a butterfly, its tiny legs moving as fast as it could, its tail wagging in delight. He smiled faintly, letting these small moments settle in his mind. Each detail mattered, each ordinary life a story in itself. When he arrived at the square, it was already bustling with people. Some were regulars from the past performances, drawn by curiosity or memory. Others were newcomers, guided only by whispers of someone extraordinary who played music that could touch hearts. The square was alive with anticipation, yet there was no noise, no mockery, only quiet expectation. The vendors stopped calling, children ran less wildly, and even the wind seemed to hold itself as if the city knew something important was about to happen. He unpacked the piano slowly, deliberately, his movements precise but unhurried. Every adjustment of the bench, every unfolding of the keys, was a ritual of respect for the instrument, for the audience, and for the moment itself. People gathered closer without being asked, forming an informal circle around him. There were no seats, no stage, nothing separating him from the crowd. He was just another person, yet already he had become more than that. He sat down and placed his hands on the keys. He closed his eyes and drew in a deep breath. When he played the first notes, they were soft, almost whispering. But as the melody unfolded, the sound filled the square, reaching every corner, touching every listener. The music was richer, fuller, yet gentle, as if he had learned from the reactions of the past days, and now knew exactly how to reach hearts. People paused in their steps, some stopping entirely. Children sat down on the pavement, captivated. Adults leaned forward, letting themselves be carried by the sound. The earlier days of skepticism were gone. This time, they listened not out of curiosity, not out of doubt, but out of a desire to feel. The man's fingers moved over the keys with precision, but there was also tenderness, as if he was speaking directly to each person without uttering a word. The notes carried stories of struggle and hope, of moments of despair and moments of quiet triumph, of everyday life made extraordinary through human feeling. Some people could not stop themselves from tears. An elderly woman held her hand to her chest, letting the music stir memories of a life long lived. A young mother held her child close, feeling warmth and comfort in the melody. Even teenagers who had been mocking before were silent, their eyes wide, absorbing the emotion. The music did not demand attention. It simply existed, and people could not help but be drawn in. The man shifted the melody, slower now, more intimate, as if he were sharing a secret with the crowd. Each note carried weight, each chord resonated deeply. The music spoke of courage, of resilience, of moments when the world seemed impossible, but life went on. The square, usually filled with noise, was silent except for the sound of the piano. Even birds in nearby trees seemed to pause, listening. The music reached places in people's hearts that words rarely could. A woman near the fountain whispered to her friend, "I feel like it's speaking to me." "Personally," her friend nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Across the square, a man leaned on a bench, gripping his coat tightly. Overcome by the emotions the piano stirred. Children were wide-eyed, sensing the power in the notes even if they could not name it. Everyone, in some way, felt the music speaking to them, whether it reminded them of love lost, dreams pursued, or challenges faced. Time seemed suspended. The melody carried on, deepening with emotion, each note more expressive than the last. The pianist did not rush. He allowed the music to flow naturally, like water finding its way. People began to connect with one another. Some held hands, others shared quiet smiles, and all shared the invisible thread of feeling created by the music. The square was no longer just a public space. It had become a shared heart. Alive with emotion and understanding, the man's eyes occasionally scanned the crowd, but he did not need to. He could see the impact in the way people shifted, leaned forward, or closed their eyes. Some brushed tears from their cheeks discreetly, others let them fall freely. Even those who had been skeptical or indifferent in the past were moved, humbled by the honesty and beauty of the performance. The music carried something beyond entertainment. It carried humanity itself. Staring at the piano. Realizing the depth of what they were witnessing, the man's fingers moved with a purpose that seemed almost otherworldly. Each note carrying a message of resilience, courage, and empathy. People felt as if he were speaking directly to them, understanding their joys, their fears, and their hopes. Some whispered to each other, unable to describe the feeling fully, only acknowledging that it was beautiful, moving, and transformative. The square had become more than a gathering place. It was now a shared moment of human emotion. A space where people connected not through words, but through feeling, as the music began to slow, returning to a gentle, reflective melody. The crowd remained silent, absorbing the final notes. The piano's sound lingered in the air, delicate and fragile, as if it would vanish if anyone moved too quickly. People were still, caught between the ordinary world they had left behind and the extraordinary emotions the music had stirred within them. Some wiped tears from their eyes, others held their hands to their chest, feeling a profound sense of quiet reflection. The man allowed the last notes to fade naturally. He did not rush to pack the piano, giving the crowd time to absorb the experience. Slowly, people began to clap softly, hesitant not to break the delicate spell. Children clapped enthusiastically, their parents joining in with smiles and gentle laughter. Adults nodded to one another, acknowledging the shared experience. Even those who had doubted or mocked him before offered quiet signs of respect, their eyes reflecting understanding and humility. Finally, the man packed the piano carefully, folding the bench and securing the lid. He stood quietly for a moment, observing the crowd, feeling the emotions that lingered in the square. No one spoke. There was no need. The music had said everything that needed to be said. He lifted the piano, blending into the ordinary flow of the city once more, leaving behind a crowd transformed not by wealth, status, or recognition, but by honesty, skill, and the raw power of human emotion expressed through music. As he walked away, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the sense of connection lingered. People carried the memory of the music in their hearts, feeling touched by something they had not expected. The man disappeared into the city streets, knowing that the experience had reached far deeper than he could have imagined. He had witnessed once again the beauty of genuine human emotion, and he understood that his journey was far from over. There were more hearts to reach, more moments to share, and more music to play, music that could move, inspire, and heal. The man did not return to the square the next day. Instead, he spent the morning walking through quieter streets, letting the echoes of the piano fade slowly in his mind. What had happened over the past days had gone deeper than he expected. He had not planned to change anyone's life. He had only wanted to understand people when money, power, and status were stripped away. Yet something bigger had started to grow. He could feel it pressing against his calm exterior. By the afternoon, messages began spreading through the city. People talked about the quiet man with the piano. Short videos appeared online, shaky and imperfect, filmed by phones held with trembling hands. The clips showed only fragments, the moving hands, the still crowd, faces filled with tears. No one knew who he was, but everyone felt something when they watched. Comments poured in. Some said the music helped them breathe again. Others said it reminded them of someone they had lost. Many simply wrote that it made them cry without knowing why. That evening, the man sat alone in a modest apartment he rarely used. Large homes existed in his life, homes filled with silence and distance, but this small place felt more honest. He sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. For the first time in years, he felt unsure. Not afraid, but thoughtful. The experiment was no longer just about observing people. Now, people were observing him, even without knowing his name. The following day, he returned to the square. The moment he appeared, people noticed. Some gasped softly. Others whispered. A few clapped before he even set the piano down. The square filled faster than before. News had spread, not through headlines, but through human curiosity and shared emotion. Street vendors paused their work. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves. People arrived early, as if afraid to miss something important. The man felt it immediately. The air was different. This time the crowd was not mocking. It was waiting. He unpacked the piano slowly, feeling every eye on him. He sat down, rested his hands on the keys, and closed his eyes. When he began to play, the music was softer than before. Not dramatic, not bold, just honest. The melody moved gently, like a conversation whispered rather than announced. The crowd leaned in, quiet and respectful. As the music flowed, something unexpected happened. A man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He was older, dressed simply, holding a phone that was already recording. He waited until the music softened, then spoke not loudly, but clearly. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm sorry to interrupt." "But—" The pianist slowly lifted his hands from the keys. The square fell completely silent. "I don't usually do this," the man continued, "but I recognize the music. I heard it years ago. At a private event, a charity evening. You were younger then, but I know this style." A ripple moved through the crowd. People looked from the speaker back to the pianist. The man at the piano opened his eyes,